I always wake up at 5 in the morning. It's an old habit that I can't seem to shake, even now that I'm 69. And according to my son, I should be enjoying my well-deserved retirement. Not that he says that because he's concerned about my health. It's more to emphasize my age. When he says well-deserved rest, it sounds like a diagnosis. My name is Brock Norwood, and I own 3 restaurants in Orland Park. Although, looking at me, you'd never guess it. I wear worn jeans, plaid shirts, and an old leather jacket that's over 20 years old. My hands are still covered with calluses, the marks of years of physical labor. I don't look like a successful businessman, and to be honest, I'm quite happy with that. My morning routine is the same every day. Coffee, oatmeal, and the news. I used to go for a run, but my knee started giving out, so now I just take a half-hour walk around the neighborhood. It's a quiet, respectable neighborhood, but nothing fancy. I could afford a mansion in an upscale part of town, but why? I bought this house 37 years ago when I married Catherine. Our son was born and raised here. My wife died here. Cancer took her 15 years ago. The walls hold memories, and I'm not ready to part with them. My path to my current position was not strewn with roses. My parents were simple workers. My father worked in a factory. My mother was a school cleaner. My education ended with school. I didn't have enough money for college, and to be honest, I wasn't very studious. At 16, I was already working on a construction site. Then I was a loader, a handyman, a bartender. The opportunity to change my life came when I was 28. The owner of a small diner where I worked as a cook's assistant decided to sell the business. I borrowed money from everyone I could, took out a loan at an exorbitant interest rate, and bought the place. Blue Moon was the name of my first restaurant. It was a tiny place with a pretentious name and shabby furniture. For the first 3 years, I worked like a dog. I cooked, washed the floors, and bought groceries at the wholesale market at 4 in the morning. Gradually, things started to look up. I wasn't a Michelin-starred chef, but I knew how to cook simple, tasty food that people liked. 7 years later, I opened a second restaurant, Moon Bay, a more pretentious place with haute cuisine and prices to match. 10 years ago, Cerebriani Svet, Silverlight, appeared. My flagship restaurant, which was featured in prestigious restaurant guides. Catherine was there the whole time. She believed in me when I doubted myself. She worked as a waitress at Blue Moon, did the bookkeeping, and calmed me down when I was ready to give up. We were a team. After she died, I felt lost, but the business helped me stay sane. It became my salvation and my purpose. Our son Kieran was born when Catherine and I were already on solid ground. He never knew the poverty we had experienced. Perhaps that was our mistake. We protected him too much from hardship. Catherine insisted on private school, then a prestigious college and business school. Kieran was always a little ashamed of me in my past. My rough manners, simple speech, and lack of education made him feel uncomfortable around his sophisticated friends. I tried to get him interested in the business. When he turned 16, I offered him a summer job at a restaurant, starting at the bottom, just like I had. He lasted 2 weeks and ran away. He said it was degrading to wash dishes and take out the trash. After college, I asked him again to join me, this time in a management position. He agreed, but without enthusiasm. He worked for a year and then left for a large consulting firm. He said he wanted to build a career on his own, not under his father's wing. I respected his choice, although deep down I hoped that one day he would return and take the reins. But the more time passed, the more obvious it became that our paths were diverging. Kieran chose a world of glamour and prestige, where appearances are more important than substance. A world that has always been alien to me. Kieran's marriage finally widened the gap between us. Bridget Higglesworth was the name of the girl he brought home 4 years ago. Tall, blonde, with impeccable posture and cold blue eyes. She worked at the same consulting agency as Kieran, as an analyst. From the moment we met, I felt her appraising gaze. She looked around my house, at the furniture, the paintings on the walls, and I saw her lips curl. Kieran told me you have a chain of restaurants, she said, emphasizing the word chain as if she didn't believe him. What kind? I named my establishments, and she nodded slightly, as if the information confirmed her suspicions. Later, I learned that she had been to Moon Bay and even Silver Light, but had never connected those restaurants with me. Apparently, in her mind, the owner of a successful restaurant business was supposed to look different. wear expensive suits, drive a luxury car, and live in a mansion. They got married a year after they met. It was a lavish ceremony at a country club with 300 guests, most of whom I had never seen before. Bridget's parents, Hugh and Veronica Higglesworth, were just like their daughter, impeccably dressed, with refined manners and condescending smiles. I was given a seat in the second row, not at the main table. Kieran apologized, saying it was more convenient from an organizational standpoint, but I could tell he was simply uncomfortable introducing me to Bridget's guests. After the wedding, our communication became even more formal. Rare phone calls, even rarer visits. Kieran always found reasons why he and Bridget couldn't come over for dinner or the weekend. Work, fatigue, other plans. When they did show up, Bridget kept her distance, answered in monosyllables, and constantly glanced at her watch. I felt that she considered these visits a waste of time, a duty that had to be performed for the sake of appearances. A year ago, they bought a house in an upscale neighborhood, a huge mansion with columns and French windows. I was invited to the housewarming party, and it was one of the most awkward evenings of my life. The guests were all Kieran and Bridget's colleagues and friends, people in expensive suits with polished smiles and empty eyes. The conversation revolved around stocks, real estate, politics, and the latest restaurant trends. I felt invisible. No one asked my opinion or took an interest in my life. At one point, I heard Bridget explain to someone that I was in the restaurant business, in a tone that made it sound like I was a dishwasher. After that evening, I never went back to their place. Kieran would sometimes drop by, always alone, always for a short time. We talked about the weather, sports, politics, everything except what really mattered. He never asked how things were going at the restaurants, never asked about my health or my plans. I became an obligation for him, an item on his to-do list. Visit father. Check. My daily life now revolves around work. I'm still actively involved in running the restaurants, although I have managers at each location. 3 times a week, I make the rounds of my properties, checking the kitchens, talking to the staff, and trying new dishes. The rest of the time I spend at home, in the garden, or in my basement workshop. Another hobby that I took up after Catherine's death. I make furniture, simple, functional, from good wood. Several tables and chairs of my own making stand in the blue moon. I don't have many friends. Most of my friends from my youth have moved away or are busy with their families. Harris is the only one left. We've known each other for 20 years and worked together as bartenders. He's the only one who knows my whole life story and doesn't judge me for my past or present. Once a week, we meet at the Blue Moon, grab a table in the back, and talk about everything under the sun. Harris has never been married and has no children, but he has a lot of stories about his travels and adventures. Sometimes I envy him. He's free as the wind. Tonight, I'm back at the Blue Moon. I'm sitting at the bar watching the customers. Many of them greet me. I'm a kind of mascot here, the old man behind the bar. No one except the staff knows that this old man is the owner of the place. I like this anonymity, the opportunity to observe people without masks and obligations. My phone vibrates in my pocket. Kieran's name flashes on the screen. Strange, he usually calls on Sundays, strictly at 7 in the evening, as if performing a weekly ritual. "Hi, son," I say, moving to a quiet corner. "Dad, are you busy this Saturday?" His voice is tense, as if he doesn't want to talk about this. "Nothing special. Why?" "It's my anniversary with Bree. 4 years. We're having dinner at a restaurant and would like you to come." I remain silent, digesting the information. In 4 years of marriage, they had never invited me to such an event. "It's important to Bree," Kieran adds, and I hear the insincerity in his voice. "Her parents are coming, and we thought it would be nice if the whole family got together." The whole family sounds almost like a mockery. We haven't been a family for a very long time. "Of course I'll come," I reply after a pause. "Where and when?" "Moon Bay, 7 o'clock, says Kieran, and something inside me snaps. "Do you know the place?" "On Oak Street." "Do I know it? I built that restaurant 25 years ago. I chose every stone for the finish, every light fixture, every painting on the walls. Moon Bay is my second child, my pride and joy, no less than Kieran." "Yes, I've heard of it," I reply in an even voice. "I'll be there." "Great. And Dad?" He hesitates. It's a rather formal occasion. Maybe you could wear that suit we gave you for Christmas? The suit hangs in the closet with the tag still on it. I've never worn it. Dark blue with some fancy lapels and a weird cut. A gift from Bridget, to be precise. Kieran never picked out gifts for me himself. We'll see, I reply evasively. See you Saturday, son. I put my phone on the bar and signal to the bartender. He pours me a whiskey. No ice, just the way I like it. A strange feeling settles inside me. A sense of inevitability, like before a storm. Kieran and Bridget don't know that Moon Bay belongs to me. I've never advertised my connection to the restaurants, especially this one. I once hoped that my son would take an interest in my business, ask questions, want to know more. But he never asked, and I never pushed. I take a sip of whiskey and look at my reflection in the mirror behind the bar. Wrinkles, gray hair, tired eyes. Such a poor old man, Bridget once said about me, thinking I couldn't hear her. Maybe I look like a normal retiree on the outside, but inside, I'm still the same stubborn guy who started from nothing and built his own little kingdom. Saturday promises to be interesting. For the first time in a long time, I feel something like excitement. Bridget chose Moon Bay, my restaurant, for her celebration. I wonder how she'll react when she finds out the truth. Or maybe I should never let her know. I haven't decided what to do yet. I finish my whiskey and nod to the bartender as I leave. It's time to go home. I need to find that suit and maybe even try it on. After all, it's an important family event. I don't want to embarrass myself in front of my daughter-in-law, who cares so much about appearances. A smile touches my lips as I step outside. For the first time in a long time, I am looking forward to seeing my son's family. On Wednesday morning, the courier delivered an envelope made of thick cream-colored paper. I had just returned from my morning walk and was about to prepare breakfast when the doorbell rang. A man in uniform handed me a tablet to sign and handed me an envelope with gold embossing. It looked so out of place in my hands that I couldn't help but smile. Inside the envelope was a formal invitation to a dinner celebrating the 4th wedding anniversary of Kieran and Bridget Norwood. Calligraphic font, gold lettering, ornate flourishes around the edges. I imagined how much time Bridget had spent choosing the design for these cards and shook my head. Then again, it was typical of her to pay such close attention to appearances. Mr. Brock Norwood, we are honored to invite you to a gala dinner celebrating the 4th wedding anniversary of Kieran and Bridget Norwood. The Moon Bay Restaurant, Saturday, May 21st, 7 p.m. Dress code, formal. Underneath the text was a handwritten note, clearly written by Kieran. Hope to see you there, Dad. It's important to us. I placed the invitation on the kitchen table and thought about it. Of course, Kieran had already told me about the dinner on the phone, but the formal invitation gave the event extra weight. Perhaps this was really an attempt to mend our relationship. It was hard to say. Over the past few years, I had learned not to harbor any illusions about my place in the lives of my son and his wife. Moon Bay was my second restaurant, and I still felt a special attachment to it. I personally selected the interior design, worked with the chef on the menu concept, and oversaw every detail. Unlike the democratic Blue Moon, the Bay was conceived from the outset as a place for special occasions. Exquisite cuisine, subdued lighting, live music in the evenings. I remember Catherine saying, "You've created a place where people will celebrate the most important moments of their lives." She was right. Over the 25 years of the restaurant's existence, hundreds of weddings, anniversaries, and engagements have taken place there. And now my own son has chosen Moon Bay for his celebration, unaware of my connection to the place. Irony of fate, or just a coincidence? Perhaps Bridget had heard good reviews or had been there before. In any case, the situation promised to be interesting. I poured myself some coffee and sat down at the table, looking at the invitation. 4 years of marriage is not such a long time to throw a lavish celebration. Apparently, Bridget needed an excuse to gather her friends and show off her status. Or maybe it was really an attempt to strengthen family ties. I wanted to believe the best. However, whatever her motives, I decided to take the invitation seriously. After all, it's a chance to spend time with my son, whom I see so rarely. Maybe in a relaxed atmosphere over a nice dinner, we'll be able to get a little closer, to overcome the wall of alienation that has grown between us over the past few years. I finished my coffee and went to the bedroom to look at the suit Kieran and Bridget had given me. It was still hanging in the closet with the tag still on, untouched since Christmas. It was dark blue, made of some kind of expensive fabric with a slight sheen. I took it off the hanger and examined it critically. Not my style, of course, but it would be fine for this occasion. Besides, Bridget would surely appreciate me wearing her gift. It could be a small step toward reconciliation. Trying on the suit, I was surprised to find that it fit quite well. Apparently, Kieran remembered my size after all. I turned around in front of the mirror, trying to get used to my new look. It was a strange feeling, like I was wearing someone else's skin. In this suit, I looked like a typical representative of the world that Kieran and Bridget aspired to. A world of social gatherings, corporate parties, and ostentatious prosperity. I took off the suit and hung it neatly back in the closet. There were 3 days left until Saturday, and I had to choose a gift for the newlyweds. What could I give a couple who seemed to have everything? In previous years, I had given them money in an envelope. Simple and practical. But this time I wanted something more personal, something that would show my desire to improve our relationship. I spent the day thinking about possible options, and by evening I decided to stop by an antique shop in the city center. My old friend Lawrence worked there, a man with impeccable taste and extensive knowledge of art. "Brock, what a nice surprise," Lawrence exclaimed when I entered the shop. "What brings you here?" "I'm looking for a gift for my son and daughter-in-law. It's their wedding anniversary." 4 years, right? Traditionally, it's a linen or silk wedding. "I don't think they need another set of bedding," I smiled. "I want something special, something they wouldn't buy for themselves." Lawrence rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "I have something interesting." "Wait a minute." He disappeared into the back room and returned with a small wooden box. Opening it, he took out a silver candlestick of unusual shape. "This is the work of Hendrik van Lint, a famous Dutch craftsman. 19th century, pure silver. Look at the fine workmanship." The candlestick was indeed beautiful. Delicate lines, the soft sheen of antique silver, an ornate pattern on the base. "It's from the Bromley family collection. Do you know the name?" "Old aristocracy. Their estate was near Orland Park. Now the heirs are selling off the collection." "How much?" I asked, already realizing that this was exactly what I was looking for. Lawrence named a figure that would probably make an ordinary person's head spin. But I could afford it, and besides, it was a gift that might help mend my relationship with my son. "I'll take it," I said, "and wrap it up nicely. It has to look respectable." Lawrence nodded with an understanding smile. He had known me long enough to understand that despite my simple clothes and unassuming manner, I could afford such purchases. Half an hour later, I left the store with an elegantly wrapped box. The candlestick was wrapped in expensive paper, tied with a satin ribbon, and came with a certificate of authenticity and a history of the item. Bridget, with her love of all things aristocratic, would appreciate such a gift. On the way home, I thought about the evening ahead. A strange feeling, a mixture of hope and anxiety, wouldn't leave me. On the one hand, I really wanted to mend my relationship with my son and his wife. On the other hand, the years of estrangement had not passed without leaving their mark, and part of me had already come to terms with the fact that we had become almost strangers. Catherine always said that family was the most important thing. "No matter what happens, Brock, remember, at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is how much you loved your loved ones." She was the center of our little family, the link between me and Kieran. After she died, that bond weakened and then almost disappeared. Maybe I'm partly to blame for what happened. I threw myself into work, trying to drown out the pain of my loss. I spent less time with my son and took less interest in his life. By that time, he was already in college, building his life, and perhaps he felt that his father had deliberately distanced himself from him. Looking back now, I realize that we both lacked the wisdom to maintain our closeness during that difficult period. We both chose the path of least resistance. We simply stopped trying to understand each other. At home, I placed the box with the gift on the living room table and took out a photo album that I hadn't opened in years. Old pictures, Kieran as a child, Catherine and I young and happy, family holidays, trips to the ocean. In these photos, we were a real family, laughing, hugging, looking at each other with love. When exactly did everything change? When did my son become ashamed of his origins? When did he decide that his mother and father's world wasn't good enough for him? It's hard to say. Perhaps it started in high school when he became friends with kids from wealthy families. or in college, where the gap between our worlds became even more apparent. I remembered an episode that may have been a turning point. Kieran was a sophomore, and I came to visit him on campus. We agreed to meet at a cafe near his dorm. I arrived a little early and was sitting at a table by the window when I saw Kieran with a group of friends. They were walking down the street laughing, and I was about to wave to him when I noticed the change in his expression when he saw me. Confusion, even something like shame flashed in his eyes. He said something to his friends and they walked on while he entered the cafe alone. "Hi, Dad," he said, hugging me awkwardly. "You're early." "Yes, I decided not to be late." "Were those your friends? Why didn't you introduce us?" "They were in a hurry for a lecture," he replied, avoiding my gaze. "Another time." But another time never came. Every time I visited, Kieran arranged our meetings so that I wouldn't run into his friends or classmates. It was as if he was afraid I would say or do something inappropriate that would embarrass him. Then came graduation, where I felt like a complete stranger. The parents of the other graduates, dressed in expensive suits and with impeccable manners, looked at me with ill-concealed curiosity. Kieran introduced me briefly. "This is my father," without further explanation, and quickly changed the subject. I closed the album and put it back on the shelf. What's the point of stirring up the past? What matters is what's happening now. I had a chance to repair my relationship with my son, and I had to take it. On Thursday, I stopped by Moon Bay to personally check on the preparations for the upcoming event. The restaurant manager, Edward, met me in his office. "Mr. Norwood, good to see you. How can I help you?" "You have a reservation for Kieran and Bridget Norwood on Saturday. They are my son and his wife. They are celebrating their wedding anniversary." Edward quickly checked the computer and nodded. "Yes, Saturday evening. A large table for 12. VIP area with a view of the garden. I want everything to be perfect. The best table, the best service. But there's one thing. They don't know I own the restaurant." Edward raised his eyebrows in surprise, but quickly regained his composure. "I understand, sir. How would you like us to address you in their presence?" "Like a regular guest. No special greetings or mention of my connection to the restaurant. I'll just be another member of the family invited to the celebration." "It will be done, sir. I will personally instruct the staff." "Thank you, Edward. One more thing. The bill is on me, of course, but no one should know that until the end of the evening." I spent another hour at the restaurant discussing the menu with the chef and selecting wines for dinner. Moon Bay had always been my pride and joy. Elegant interior, impeccable service, exquisite cuisine. I created this place with love and attention to every detail, and it has become one of the most prestigious restaurants in the city. I wonder why Bridget chose Moon Bay. Maybe she had been here before and liked it? Or did someone recommend it? In any case, it was a strange twist of fate. My sister-in-law, without even knowing it, chose the restaurant I had created from scratch for her celebration. Friday was spent preparing for the evening. I took my suit to the dry cleaners, got a haircut from my old barber Tom, and even bought a new shirt, a white one with French cuffs, as the salesman at the store had recommended. Harris called in the evening. We agreed to meet on Sunday, and I told him about the upcoming dinner at Moon Bay. "So your folks still don't know you own a restaurant?" he asked in surprise. No, there had never been a good moment to tell them. "And you're not going to enlighten them on Saturday?" I wondered. Should I reveal my connection to the restaurant during dinner? On the one hand, it might be an unpleasant surprise for Bridget, who clearly wanted to impress her guests. On the other hand, might knowing that her father-in-law owned a prestigious restaurant change her attitude toward me? "I don't know," I replied honestly. "I'll play it by ear." "Well, in any case, it'll be an interesting evening," Harris chuckled. "It's a shame I won't be able to see it." On Saturday, I woke up earlier than usual. A strange excitement kept me awake. It felt like I was not going to a family dinner, but to some kind of decisive battle. In a sense, that was exactly what it was, a battle for a place in my own son's life. The day dragged on agonizingly slowly. I tried to occupy myself with my usual chores, tidying up the house, working in the garden, reading a new book, but my thoughts kept returning to the evening ahead. What would I say? How should I behave? Should I reveal my connection to the restaurant? At 5 o'clock, I began to get ready. I took a shower, shaved, put on a new shirt, and the suit that Kieran and Bridget had given me. I looked at myself in the mirror and was surprised to find that I looked different, more respectable, more presentable. Maybe there was something to it. Maybe Bridget was right, and appearance really did matter in their world. I took the antique cufflinks that had belonged to my father out of the safe, the only valuable thing he had left me. They were simple silver circles with no patterns or stones, but to me they meant more than any jewel. My father only wore them on the most important occasions: his wedding, my wedding, and Kieran's christening. At 6:30, I called a taxi. I could have driven my own car, an unremarkable sedan that had served me faithfully for 7 years. But I decided that today was a special occasion. Besides, I might have a glass or two of wine. On the way to the restaurant, I went over the possible scenarios for the evening in my head again. What if Bridget was cold and unfriendly as usual? What if Kieran acted like he was ashamed of me again? What if I couldn't control myself and said something I'd regret later? No, I had to stay calm and friendly. After all, I had come in peace and with a sincere desire to mend our relationship. A gift, a new suit, polite manners. I had done everything to show my good intentions. The taxi stopped at the entrance to Moon Bay. I paid the driver, took the gift box, and froze for a moment, staring at the restaurant's facade. Soft light streamed from the windows, the sound of piano music drifted out, and elegant guests entered through the massive dark wood doors. My brainchild, my pride and joy. And today I would enter, not as the owner, but as an ordinary guest invited to a family celebration. On Saturday evening, the Moon Bay restaurant looked exactly as I had imagined it many years ago. Elegant lighting creating an intimate atmosphere, soft piano music drifting from the main hall, impeccably dressed waiters gliding between tables with the grace of dancers. I felt a strange sense of pride mixed with detachment, as if I were watching my own creation from the sidelines, invisible to everyone. The maître d' led me to the table where the guests had already gathered. The VIP area of the restaurant was located on a glassed-in veranda overlooking the garden, artfully lit with soft lights. The large oval table was set with the restaurant's signature porcelain and crystal, which I had personally selected at a specialized exhibition in Milan 10 years ago. Kieran noticed me first and stood up to greet me. He looked tense, as if my appearance was a test for him. "Dad, you came." His voice sounded strangely surprised, as if he had doubted my visit until the last moment. "Of course," I shook his outstretched hand. "I wouldn't miss such an important day." Bridget turned around when she heard our conversation. A look of annoyance flashed across her face, which she quickly masked with a polite smile. "Brock, I'm glad you could join us," she said, without standing up. "We were just about to order some drinks." I nodded and handed her a small wrapped box with a gift. "Congratulations to both of you. 4 years is a big milestone." Bridget took the gift with her fingertips, as if afraid of getting dirty, and put it aside without much interest. "Thank you. That's very kind of you," she said in a deliberately condescending tone. "Kieran, why don't you introduce your father to our guests?" My son cleared his throat nervously and began to walk around the table, introducing me to everyone present. "This is my father, Brock," he said, and I noticed how carefully he avoided any details about my life or profession. Bridget's parents, Hugh and Veronica Higglesworth, nodded with polite coolness. I had only met them a few times in the 4 years since our children had been married, and each encounter had been filled with awkward silence and fake smiles. "Nice to see you again," I said, shaking Hugh's dry hand. "Likewise," he replied in a tone that clearly conveyed the opposite. The rest of the guests were strangers to me, Kieran and Bridget's colleagues and friends from their social circle. They were all young, well-dressed, and carried themselves with the confidence that comes with knowing their place in society. I was shown to a seat at the very end of the table, as far away as possible from the center, where Kieran and Bridget were sitting. Next to me was a young man named Elliot, who, after a brief exchange of pleasantries, turned his attention entirely to the attractive blonde sitting across from him. I looked around trying to catch my son's eye, but Kieran was completely absorbed in conversation with his friends sitting opposite him. The whole group was loudly discussing some corporate party that had recently taken place at their office, laughing at inside jokes and sharing their impressions. I felt completely out of place at this celebration of life. A waiter approached me to take my drink order. I recognized him. Marco, who had been working at Moon Bay for about 5 years. He recognized me too, and a look of confusion flashed across his face. Just mineral water, I said quietly, and no special treatment, please. I'm just a guest here today. He nodded understandingly and walked away, and I returned to watching what was happening. Bridget sat at the head of the table, gesturing animatedly as she talked. She looked flawless. A champagne-colored silk dress, a pearl necklace, her hair perfectly styled. Her laughter was melodious, but it lacked sincerity. It was the kind of laughter people use as a tool for social interaction. Kieran looked like a pale shadow next to her. He smiled, nodded, occasionally interjected, but mostly let his wife take center stage. Once upon a time, my son was full of energy and ideas, with his own opinion on every issue. What happened to that passionate young man? When did he turn into this faceless companion of his ambitious wife? The appetizers were brought out, exquisite canapes with caviar, tuna tartare, beef carpaccio, dishes that I personally approved for the Moon Bay menu. I chose the carpaccio and slowly savored each bite, watching the other guests eagerly devour their food without stopping their conversation. "How are the appetizers, Brock?" Bridget suddenly asked, and all eyes turned to me. "I hope they suit your tastes?" There was clearly a catch in her question, and I felt a tense silence hang over the table. "The carpaccio is excellent," I replied calmly. "The chef here is doing a great job." "Oh, so you know your way around haute cuisine?" Her tone was openly mocking. "Kieran said you prefer more simple food." I noticed my son tense up and shoot his wife a warning glance, but she ignored him. "Good food has no social status, Bridget," I replied gently. "It's either tasty or it's not." Several guests nodded approvingly, and I noticed Bridget's cheeks flush slightly. She clearly hadn't expected me to respond that way. The conversation at the table resumed, but I could feel eyes on me. Bridget's parents watched me particularly closely, as if trying to figure out who I really was. Their daughter had clearly presented me as some kind of misunderstanding in her husband's life, and now they were looking for confirmation of this characterization. After the appetizers, the main courses were served. I chose the restaurant's signature dish, filet mignon with truffle sauce and potato gratin. The chef and I spent several months developing the recipe for this dish, striving to achieve the perfect combination of flavors. "I see you've chosen the most expensive dish on the menu," Bridget remarked as the waiter placed the plate in front of me. "Don't worry, Kieran is treating us today." Her comment was deliberately loud, and I noticed several guests exchange knowing glances. Kieran looked as if he wanted to sink through the floor. "I had no doubt about my son's hospitality," I replied, keeping my composure. "And I didn't choose this dish because of the price, but because it's really delicious." "How can you tell?" Bridget persisted. "I doubt that your usual establishments serve anything like this." I felt irritation rising inside me, but I held it back. I didn't want to cause a scene at my son's party, no matter how unpleasant his wife's remarks were. Soon, dessert and champagne were brought in. Bridget was becoming increasingly aggressive, her remarks increasingly caustic. She was clearly working towards some goal, and I could guess what it was. "Tell me, Brock, do you often go to places like Moon Bay?" she asked with feigned interest. "It's one of the best restaurants in town." "I know," I replied simply. "Then you must understand that places like this have a certain standard," she continued, her eyes narrowing. "Not everyone can afford to dine here regularly." "Bridget," Kieran warned, but she ignored him. "I just mean that sometimes people should know their place," she said sharply. "Not everyone fits into a certain environment, and that's okay. To each their own." A heavy silence hung over the table. The guests looked at their plates, clearly feeling uncomfortable. Bridget's parents, however, smiled, clearly approving of their daughter's actions. I slowly put down my fork and looked Bridget straight in the eye. "What exactly are you trying to say, Bridget?" I asked quietly. She straightened up, as if she had been waiting for that question. "What I'm trying to say, Brock, is that a poor old man like you clearly doesn't belong in our circle," she said clearly. "I invited you out of politeness because you're Kieran's father, but to be honest, I think you'd be more comfortable somewhere else. A diner, for example." Kieran jumped up, his face contorted with shock and shame. "Bridget, what are you saying?" he exclaimed. "He's my father." "Exactly," she said curtly. He's your father, not mine, and I'm tired of pretending that I enjoy his company. Look at him, Kieran. He doesn't fit into our lives, into our circle. He embarrasses me in front of my friends, in front of my colleagues. I sat motionless, allowing this torrent of venom to pour out until it was over. Strangely, I felt no resentment or anger, only fatigue and something akin to pity for this woman, for whom outward appearances meant more than human relationships. I think he'd better leave, Bridget concluded, looking at me with open contempt. Right now. At that moment, the maitre d'Edward approached the table, having obviously heard the last part of Bridget's monologue. I apologize for interrupting, he said with impeccable politeness, but we have a small situation in the kitchen, and the chef would like to speak with Mr. Norwood. Bridget smiled triumphantly, clearly deciding that her wish had been granted and that the maitre d' was politely escorting me out of the restaurant. See, even the staff can tell you don't belong here, she said with satisfaction. Let's not drag out the farewell, Brock. I slowly got up, and Edward came closer to pull out my chair. Mr. Norwood, he said loudly enough for everyone at the table to hear, the head chef would like to discuss the new menu for the summer season with you. As the restaurant owner, you must approve the changes. A dead silence fell over the table. Bridget froze with her glass in her hand, her face gradually turning the color of a ripe beet. Kieran stared at me with wide eyes, the look of utter amazement evident. The owner, stammered Bridget, her voice sounding as if she couldn't breathe. You own Moon Bay? Edward looked genuinely surprised. Of course, ma'am. Mr. Norwood owns not only Moon Cove, but also Blue Moon and Silver Light. It's a whole chain of the best restaurants in town. Didn't you know? The guests at the table began to whisper, casting curious glances at me and Bridget. The situation was taking a dramatic turn. This must be some kind of mistake. Bridget laughed nervously, trying to save face. Kieran, tell them your father can't be the owner of this restaurant. My son looked completely lost. Dad? His voice trembled. Is it true? I nodded. Yes, son. Moon Bay is my baby. I founded it 25 years ago. Bridget, who had just seemed so confident in her superiority, now resembled a fish washed up on shore. She opened and closed her mouth but couldn't utter a word. Her face turned crimson, and her eyes darted between me and the guests, as if seeking support or an explanation for what was happening. But why didn't you ever tell us? Kieran finally managed to say. His voice sounded genuinely shocked, mixed with something like resentment. You never asked, I replied simply, and, to be honest, I was curious to see if you would notice. Your mother and I founded Blue Moon when you were very young. Moon Bay came along when you were 12. You used to come here with us a lot. Kieran looked as if he was trying to remember something long forgotten. I remember we used to come here with Mom sometimes, but I thought you were just... He faltered, clearly searching for the right words. Just what? Were you regular visitors? I smiled with a touch of sadness. Perhaps you saw what you wanted to see, son. Edward, who was still standing nearby, cleared his throat delicately. Mr. Norwood, the boss would really like to discuss some matters with you, if you have a moment. I nodded and turned to the other guests, who were watching the scene with undisguised interest. I apologize, but my duties as owner sometimes require my attention. I hope you continue to enjoy your evening. With that, I followed Edward, leaving a deafening silence at the table. After a brief conversation with the head chef, I decided not to return to the table. It was awkward to say goodbye, and the evening was hopelessly ruined. Through Edward, I sent word that I had to leave on business and ordered that all the guests be served the best desserts and cognac on the house. I got home around 11 o'clock in the evening. I turned on the light in the hallway, threw my keys on the table by the door, and took off my jacket with relief. The events of the evening continued to replay in my head like scenes from a movie. Bridget's expression when she realized who I really was. Kieran's confusion. The whispers of the guests. Well, now the cards were on the table. I hadn't planned such a dramatic revelation, but maybe it was for the best. At least now I wouldn't have to pretend and put up with my sister-in-law's condescending attitude. I poured myself a whiskey and sat down in an armchair, staring at Catherine's photo on the mantelpiece. What would she say now? She would probably remind me that family is the most important thing, that I should try to fix things, find a way to reconcile. But is there still a way? Have we gone too far? My phone vibrated. A message from Kieran. Dad, we need to talk. I'll come over tomorrow morning. I didn't reply. I didn't know what to say. Instead, I finished my whiskey, took a shower, and went to bed, feeling a strange emptiness inside. The next morning began with a persistent ring at the door. I hadn't finished my first cup of coffee when Kieran appeared at the door, pale with red eyes and a rumpled shirt. It was obvious he hadn't slept well. Dad, he began as soon as I opened the door. I need to explain. I stepped aside silently, letting him into the house. He walked into the kitchen and sank heavily into a chair. Coffee? I asked, getting a second cup. Yes, please, he said, running his hand over his face. I didn't sleep all night, thinking about yesterday. Dad, why didn't you ever tell me you owned Moon Bay? I set the cup of coffee in front of him and sat down opposite him. Why didn't you ever ask? I replied with a question. You knew I had a chain of restaurants. Was it really that hard to ask what kind? Kieran looked embarrassed. I don't know what I thought. I guess I imagined something like Blue Moon. Simple diners, nothing special. Blue Moon was my first restaurant, I said calmly. But the business grew and new establishments opened. Moon Bay has been around for 25 years. Silver Light for 10. Did you really never wonder where I got the money to pay for your private school and prestigious college? Kieran lowered his eyes. I just didn't connect the dots. You know, when I was a kid, I thought we were, well, not rich. You always dressed simply and lived modestly. And then when I grew up and found out about your business, I was already busy with my own life. I sighed. He was right. I had never flaunted my wealth. I didn't see the point. Money had always been a means to an end for me, not an end in itself. Dad, I need to apologize for Bridget, Kieran said after a pause. What she said yesterday, that was unforgivable. She had no right to talk to you like that. But she said exactly what she thought, I pointed out, and what you think, apparently. No, he exclaimed. Dad, I've never been ashamed of you. Really? I looked him straight in the eye. Then why have you never invited me to your company parties? Why was I seated in the second row at your wedding instead of at the head table? Why do you avoid talking about my profession every time we meet your friends or colleagues? Kieran was silent, and his silence spoke louder than any words. I don't blame you, son, I continued more gently. Your mother and I grew up in simple families and were used to a simple life. Even when the business became successful, we didn't see the point in changing our habits or our environment. But you grew up in a different world. Private school, college, friends from wealthy families. You wanted to fit into that world, and I understand that. But that doesn't excuse my behavior, Kieran said quietly, and it certainly doesn't excuse Bridget's words. He took a sip of coffee and continued. She's very remorseful, Dad. When we got home yesterday, she was crying. She said she didn't know how awful she felt. She wants to apologize in person. I raised an eyebrow skeptically. Remorseful because she behaved badly? Or because she found out that her poor old father-in-law is the owner of a prestigious restaurant? Kieran looked even more embarrassed. Dad, please, give her a chance. Give us a chance. We could come over tonight, talk calmly, explain everything. I thought about it. Part of me wanted to tell them both to go to hell. The other part, the part that still remembered the little boy running toward me with open arms, wanted to give them that chance. All right, I said finally. Come over at 7, but I can't promise I'll accept her apology. Kieran breathed a sigh of relief. Thanks, Dad. Thanks, really. After he left, I sat in the kitchen for a long time, thinking about our conversation. Kieran seemed genuinely upset, but something told me that the situation wasn't that simple. Bridget might regret what she said, but it was unlikely that she had changed her opinion of me. It was just that now she had to reckon with the fact that I wasn't the harmless old man she could humiliate with impunity. Around noon, I called Harris. I needed advice from someone who knew me better than anyone else. So, how was your evening? He asked instead of saying hello. Disastrous, I replied, and briefly recounted what had happened. Harris whistled. What a turn of events. I can just imagine the look on your sister-in-law's face when she found out the truth. Yes, it was quite a sight, I said, smiling involuntarily. But now Kieran says she's remorseful and wants to apologize. They're coming tonight. And you believe them? Harris's voice was skeptical. I don't know, I replied honestly. Kieran seemed sincere, but Bridget, I have a feeling she just wants to save face. Now that she knows about my position, she'll have to reconsider her attitude toward me. Exactly, Harris agreed. She'll be nice to you not because she suddenly developed respect for you as a person, but because now you're the owner of prestigious restaurants, a man with money and status. In other words, by her standards, you're worthy of attention. I sighed. Harris had said exactly what I was thinking. But what should I do? He's still my son. Listen to them, Harris advised. Hear their apologies. Be polite. But don't rush to forgive and forget. Give yourself time to understand how sincere they are. And think about your business. What do you mean? I mean exactly what I said. You said you wanted to bring Kieran into the restaurant business, but he refused. Now that he knows about your success, he may change his mind. The question is, do you want him to? Do you trust him and his wife enough to let them into your business? I thought about it. Indeed, now that the truth was out, Kieran might be interested in my business, but not out of genuine interest or a desire to continue the family business, but because of the sudden opportunities that had opened up. As for Bridget, her interest would be purely mercenary. No, I said finally. I'm not ready to entrust them with what Catherine and I have built all our lives. Then you should review your financial and legal affairs, Harris said seriously. Just in case. Do you think they could claim the business? I don't know, my friend, but it's better to be safe than sorry. You're the sole owner, but Kieran is your only heir. And Bridget, from what you've told me, isn't the type to pass up an opportunity. After talking to Harris, I thought long and hard about what he said. He was right. I needed to reevaluate my affairs. Over the years, I had accumulated a considerable fortune, owned 3 successful restaurants, several properties, and had substantial investments. In the event of my death, all of this would pass to Kieran by law, and therefore, in part, to Bridget. It hadn't bothered me before. I was sure that my son was worthy of the inheritance, that he would take care of my life's work. But now, after everything that had happened, I began to have doubts. What if Bridget convinced him to sell the restaurants? What if everything that Catherine and I had built with so much love was destroyed in the pursuit of quick profits? I took out my phone and called my lawyer, Max Ellington. We had known each other for over 20 years, and I trusted his professionalism completely. Brock, it's been a while, he greeted me. How are you? Not great, Max. I need to review my will and some other documents. When can we meet? Max sensed the seriousness in my voice and didn't ask any questions. I can see you tomorrow at 10 in the morning. Is that okay? Perfect. Thanks, Max. I spent the rest of the day preparing for Kieran and Bridget's visit that evening. I tidied up the house and prepared dinner. Nothing fancy, just a simple home-cooked meal, roast meat, mashed potatoes, and a vegetable salad. I opened a bottle of good wine that I had been saving for a special occasion. It wasn't that I wanted to impress my sister-in-law. It was more my way of saying, I know the good things in life, I just don't flaunt them. The doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock. I took a deep breath to collect my thoughts and went to answer the door. Kieran and Bridget were standing on the doorstep. He looked nervous. She looked flawless, as always. Perfect hair, subtle makeup, an elegant dress. In her hands, she held a bouquet of flowers and a bottle of wine. Good evening, Brock, she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Thank you for agreeing to see us. I nodded silently and stepped aside to let them in. Bridget looked around with renewed interest as if she were seeing my house for the first time. I could almost physically feel her reevaluating everything she saw. The old but sturdy furniture, the paintings on the walls, the books in the bookcase. What had previously seemed to her to be signs of modest means were now perceived as the conscious choices of a successful man who preferred authenticity to ostentatious wealth. Come into the kitchen, I said. I've made dinner. Oh, how nice, Bridget sang with feigned enthusiasm. You cook, Brock? That's so unusual for a man of your generation. When you run restaurants, you'll learn to cook, I replied dryly. We sat down at the kitchen table, and I poured wine into glasses. There was an awkward pause. Dad, Kieran began, clearing his throat. We came to apologize. What happened yesterday was unforgivable. Brock, Bridget chimed in, her voice as sweet as molasses. I feel terrible about what I said. I don't know what came over me. It was stress, exhaustion. I never really thought badly of you. I stared at her silently, not helping her out of the awkward situation. She fidgeted nervously with the napkin. The truth is, she continued, seeing that I wasn't going to respond, I've always admired you. Your authenticity, the way you stay true to yourself, no matter what. It's so rare these days. Bridget, I finally interrupted the flow of hypocrisy. Let's be honest. Yesterday you called me a poor old man and said I didn't belong in your circle. Those weren't just words, they were an expression of how you really feel about me. The only thing you regret right now is that you misjudged my financial situation. She blushed but quickly regained her composure. No, Brock, I'm truly sorry. My words were terrible, regardless of whether you own a restaurant or not. Really? I raised an eyebrow. So if I were just a pensioner with a limited income, you'd be sitting here apologizing just the same? Bridget hesitated, not knowing how to respond. Kieran came to her rescue. Dad, we're both to blame. I should have told Bridget about your business a long time ago, but for some reason I didn't. Maybe I was afraid she would treat you differently if she knew. And you were right, I remarked dryly. No, no, Bridget hastily objected. I would never. Brock, please give me a chance to make it up to you. I want us to have a good relationship. You're Kieran's father. We're family. I looked at them both, at my son, who looked genuinely upset, and at his wife, who was trying so hard to look remorseful. What was I supposed to do? Forgive and forget? Pretend nothing had happened? Or put an end to a relationship that had long since ceased to be genuine? Let's have dinner, I said finally. The food is getting cold. Dinner was tense. Bridget tried to keep the conversation going, asking me about restaurants, how I started my business, what my plans were for the future. Her sudden interest was so obvious that it became awkward. Kieran was mostly silent, occasionally glancing anxiously at me and then at his wife. After dinner, we moved to the living room. I offered them coffee, which they politely accepted. Bridget, emboldened, began looking at the photographs on the mantelpiece. Oh, is that you and Kieran? She asked, pointing to a picture of me holding a little boy. How sweet. And that must be Catherine? She was very beautiful. I nodded, not wanting to discuss memories of my wife with her. Kieran never talked much about his childhood, she continued. Now I understand why he's so attached to this house, even though we could have helped you move to something more modern. I'm perfectly comfortable here, I snapped, and I don't need your help. Kieran shot his wife a warning glance, but she didn't notice. Of course, she agreed hastily. I just thought, with your means. But if you like a simple life, that's your right. I felt irritation building inside me. Even now, trying to smooth things over, she couldn't resist sounding condescending. Bridget, I said calmly, let's get something straight. I live the way I want to, not because I can't afford anything better, but because it's my conscious choice. I don't need your approval or advice. She fell silent, clearly hurt by my words. Kieran looked miserable. Dad, please, he began. Bridget is just trying to make things work. No, Kieran, I objected. She's trying to adjust to new information about my financial situation. That's not the same thing. I turned to Bridget. I appreciate you coming to apologize, but don't think I don't see what's going on. Yesterday I was the poor old man who didn't fit in with your crowd. Today I'm the owner of prestigious restaurants, a man worth keeping in your circle, but I'm still the same Brock Norwood, regardless of what you think of my bank account. Bridget blushed but said nothing. Kieran looked as if he wanted to sink through the floor. What do you want, Dad? He asked quietly. For us to leave your life? I sighed. No, that wasn't what I wanted. Despite everything that had happened, he was still my son, the only family I had left. I want honesty, Kieran. From you, from your wife. I want a relationship based on mutual respect, not financial gain. We can do that, Bridget said hastily. We can start over. Forget about past misunderstandings. Misunderstandings? I raised an eyebrow. What happened yesterday wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a revelation, and I'm not sure we can just turn the page and pretend nothing happened. Kieran looked dejected. What are you suggesting, Dad? Time, I replied. I need time to think things through, to decide if I want to continue this relationship on new terms or if it's better to end it. End it? Thundrum. There was genuine fear in Karen's voice. Are you talking about breaking up with me? With your son? I'm talking about being honest with ourselves, Karen. For the last few years, our relationship has existed mostly on paper. Rare phone calls, even rarer visits. You were ashamed of me in front of your friends, avoided talking about my work, and your wife thought I wasn't worthy of being in her company. Bridget opened her mouth to protest, but I stopped her with a gesture. Don't, Bridget. We both know it's true, and now that it's out in the open, we all need to decide what to do next. After they left, I sat in the living room for a long time, looking at Catherine's photo. What would she say now? Would she approve of my actions? Or would she advise me to forgive and forget for the sake of keeping the family together? 2 weeks had passed since the evening when Kieran and Bridget came to apologize. 2 weeks of reflection, doubt, and finally, determination. I thought a lot about our conversation, about how sincere their words and actions were. Bridget, with her sudden interest in my life and business. Kieran, torn between his wife and his father, unable to take a firm stand. The more I analyzed the situation, the clearer it became that nothing had changed, only the outward appearance. Bridget was now polite to me, not because she had suddenly gained respect for me as a person, but because she had learned about my financial situation. Kieran still showed no real interest in my life or business, although he now felt it necessary to pretend that he cared. Over the next 2 weeks, they called several times, invited me to dinner, and suggested spending the weekend together. I politely declined, citing my busy schedule. I needed time to make a final decision, and today that decision was made. I met with Max Ellington, my lawyer, and signed all the necessary documents, changing the will, setting up a trust fund, reorganizing the ownership structure of the restaurants. Everything was done quickly and efficiently, without unnecessary emotion. Are you sure you want to go down this path, Brock? Max asked when we were done with the paperwork. This is a big step. I'm sure, I replied firmly. I have to protect what I've built, not just for myself, but for the people who work in my restaurants, for Catherine's memory. Max nodded. He had known me long enough to understand that once I had made a decision, I would not back down. What will you tell your son? The truth, I shrugged, that I've rewritten my will and reorganized the business, that he is no longer my heir in the traditional sense. He won't take it lightly, perhaps, but it's my decision and I'm prepared to stand by it. Leaving Max's office, I immediately called Kieran and suggested we meet. He sounded surprised but agreed to come over to my place that evening. When I got home, I felt a strange sense of relief. It was as if a weight that had been on my shoulders for years had finally been lifted. I had made a difficult but necessary decision, and now I could move on. While waiting for Kieran, I decided to make dinner. Something simple, nothing fancy. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green salad. Food my son loved as a child, when everything was simpler and clearer. Kieran arrived at 7 o'clock sharp, alone without Bridget, which surprised me a little. Dad, he hugged me, and in that embrace I felt tension. You wanted to talk? Yes, I stepped back, letting him into the house. Come into the kitchen. I made dinner. We sat down at the table, and I divided the food between our plates. Kieran looked at me with poorly concealed anxiety. Is something wrong? He asked when the silence dragged on. I put down my fork and looked him straight in the eye. I've rewritten my will, Kieran, and I've reorganized the ownership structure of the restaurants. He froze, his fork suspended in midair. What does that mean? It means you are no longer my sole heir. I have set up a trust fund that will manage my assets after my death. You will receive some of the money, but the restaurants and most of the property will go to the trust. Kieran slowly put his fork down on the table. A whole range of emotions flashed across his face. Surprise, confusion, hurt. Why? He asked quietly. Is this because of what happened at the restaurant? Because of what Bridget said? Not only that, I shook my head. It's the result of a lot of thought about our relationship, about your attitude toward my business, about how you see your future. But I'm your son, indignation rang in his voice. Your only child. Who else can you leave all this to? It's not about who to leave it to, Kieran. It's about preserving what I've built. The restaurants aren't just a business, they're my life. And your mother's too. We put not only money into them, but our hearts and souls. And you think I wouldn't preserve them? He looked genuinely hurt. I don't know, I replied honestly. You never showed any interest in my business. When I offered you a share, you turned me down. You said you wanted to build your own career, not one under your father's wing, and I respected your choice. That was a long time ago. I was young and stupid. And now, I interrupted him. You suddenly became interested in restaurants only after you found out how successful they were. Before that, you didn't even know what kind of establishments I owned. Kieran lowered his eyes. He couldn't argue because it was true. So what now? He asked after a pause. Are you just cutting me out of your life? No, I shook my head. I would never do that. You're my son, and I love you. But I have to protect what I've built. Not just for myself, but for the people who work in the restaurants. For the memory of your mother. What about me? His voice sounded hurt. Don't you think about me? About my future? I do, I sighed. That's why I left you enough money to live comfortably. But the restaurants, they have to stay the way your mother and I created them, not turned into another asset in an investment portfolio or sold to new owners. Kieran was silent, thinking about what I had said. I could see different emotions battling inside him, resentment, disappointment, maybe even anger, but also an understanding that I was right in my assessment of the situation. Bridget will be furious, he said finally. I know, I nodded, and that only confirms that my decision is right. He looked up at me, and something like shame flashed in his eyes. She, she really thought that now that we know about your condition, everything would change, that you would want to help us buy a new house with investments? Exactly, I smiled sadly. She didn't see me as a father, but as a wallet. And to be honest, I'm disappointed that you support that approach. I don't, he faltered. I just, Dad, does it have to be so complicated? We're a family. Aren't we supposed to help each other? Family isn't just financial support, Kieran. It's respect, care, and genuine interest in each other's lives. When was the last time you asked me about my life? Not about money or restaurants, but how I feel, what I'm interested in, what I'm thinking about. He was silent, and that silence spoke louder than any words. See, I sighed. We stopped being a real family a long time ago. We're just maintaining the appearance of a relationship. And you want to change that? Hope crept into his voice. I want to be honest, I replied. With you and with myself. I'm tired of pretending everything is fine when it's not. Tired of the insincerity, of feeling like I'm only needed when something is required of me. Kieran lowered his head. I didn't want it to turn out this way, he said quietly. It just kind of developed in this direction. Bridget, her family, our circle of friends, they're all so high status, and I wanted to fit in. Even if it meant being ashamed of your father? I wasn't ashamed of you, he exclaimed. But then, meeting my gaze, he slumped. Or maybe a little. Not you as a person, but your lifestyle, the way you dressed, the way you spoke. It was stupid, I know. It hurt, Kieran, I said simply, to see my own son avoid introducing me to his friends, to see him cringe when I showed up in his circle. But I put up with it because I loved you and wanted you to be happy. And now? Now I realize it was a mistake. I should have been more honest with you. Tell you that your behavior hurts me. Maybe then we could have changed things before they went this far. We both fell silent. Dinner was getting cold on our plates, but neither of us touched it. This conversation was too important. Too much was at stake. What happens now? Kieran finally asked. With us, I mean. I don't know, I shrugged. It depends on both of us. I don't want to break up with you, Kieran. You're my son and I'll always love you. But I want our relationship to be genuine, based on mutual respect, not financial expectations. What about Bridget? That's your marriage and I won't interfere. But I'm not going to pretend that her attitude toward me is acceptable or that I approve of her outlook on life. Kieran sighed. She won't take this easily. That's not my problem, I said firmly. I've made my decision and I'm not going to change it. He got up from the table and paced around the kitchen, as if trying to collect his thoughts. I need to think about all this, he said finally. It's too much information at once. I understand, I nodded. You need time. Yes. He rubbed his face with his hands. I think I'll go. I need to, I don't know, just be alone and think things over. I walked him to the door. Before leaving, he turned to me with an uncertain expression on his face. Dad, I'm sorry for a lot of things. I hope you know that. I know, son. I smiled weakly. And I'm sorry too. But sometimes admitting your mistakes is the first step to fixing them. He nodded and left, and I stood in the doorway, watching his car disappear around the corner. A strange feeling of emptiness and liberation washed over me. It was as if I had finally shed a heavy burden that I had been carrying for many years. The next few days were spent working. I went to restaurants, met with managers, discussed plans for the future. Immersing myself in business helped me not to think about my personal situation and gave me a sense of control and stability. Kieran didn't call or show up. I didn't insist on contact, giving him time to process everything that had happened. However, I didn't have any illusions. Knowing Bridget, I could guess that she wouldn't accept my decisions and would turn her husband against me. A week later, I received a letter from Kieran's lawyer. It was a formal notification that my son was considering challenging my latest arrangements regarding the inheritance in the business. It wasn't a surprise, but it still hurt. However, Max assured me that all the documents had been drawn up flawlessly and that Kieran had no legal grounds for a claim. They can try, Max said on the phone, but it will be a waste of time and money. I never thought it would come to this, I admitted. Legal threats from my own son. It's probably his wife's idea, Max remarked, or her parents. They've probably already spent your future money in their imagination. Maybe he was right, but that didn't change the fact that my son had chosen sides in this conflict, and it wasn't my side. A few days later, Kieran called. His voice sounded tense and formal. Dad, I think we need to meet to talk about your decisions. If you're referring to the letter from your lawyer, there's nothing to talk about, I replied calmly. My decision is final. That's not fair, he said, his voice tinged with hurt. I'm your son, your only heir. You can't just cut me out of your life. I'm not cutting you out of my life, Kieran. I'm protecting what I've built. There's a difference. Bridget says, I don't care what Bridget says, I interrupted him. This is my decision, and it's not up for discussion. Then we have a problem, he said coldly, because I'm not going to give up what is rightfully mine. By what right, Kieran? I asked quietly. By birth, or by participating in the creation of the business? Because I don't remember the latter. He paused, clearly not expecting such a response. You're my father, he said finally, and everything you have should be mine. That's how the world works. Not my world, I replied firmly. In my world, people get what they deserve, what they put their labor, time, and soul into, not what simply falls into their hands by right of birth. You'll regret this, his voice became angry. We'll go to court if necessary. Do what you think is best, I said calmly. But know that every step you take in that direction only strengthens my conviction that I made the right decision. That was the end of the conversation. Kieran hung up, and I sat there with the phone in my hand, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and determination. Sadness that my own son had turned into someone I hardly recognized, and determination to continue on my path, no matter what. A month later, I received official notification that Kieran had withdrawn his claim. Apparently, his lawyers had explained to him that the lawsuit was futile. This brought some relief, although it did not heal the wound inflicted on our relationship. I threw myself into my work with renewed energy. I started renovating Blue Moon, the oldest of my restaurants. I began developing a concept for a new establishment, a small cafe with homemade baked goods, which had always been Catherine's dream. These projects gave me a sense of forward movement, an opportunity to focus on creation rather than destruction. One evening, as I was working late at Moon Bay, Edward, my loyal maitre d', approached me. Mr. Norwood, we have an interesting opportunity, he said. Remember that charity that teaches cooking to children from low-income families? They're looking for a place to hold master classes. And you're suggesting our kitchen? I raised an eyebrow with interest. If you don't mind, it would be during non-working hours, so it wouldn't interfere with the main business. And I think it's a good cause. I thought about it. The idea was interesting. Sharing my knowledge and resources with those who really want to learn, who may dream of a career in the restaurant business, but don't have the opportunity. Get in touch with them, I decided. We'll discuss the details. That's how a new direction appeared in my life. Educational programs for young people interested in cooking and the restaurant business. At first, these were just master classes in the kitchen of Lunaya, then courses at Sini Lun, and then a full-fledged training program, which we launched in collaboration with a local college. I personally taught some of the classes, talking about my journey in business, the difficulties and victories. Seeing the young people's eyes light up, their genuine interest and enthusiasm was a real pleasure. Some of them later came to my restaurants for internships, and the most talented were offered jobs. Once, after another master class, a young man of about 18 approached me. He was tall, thin, with serious eyes. "Mr. Norwood," he said, extending his hand, "I wanted to thank you for the program. It's life-changing." "I'm glad to hear that," I shook his hand. "What's your name?" "Aiden Foster, sir. I'm from St. Charles, from a foster family. I never thought I'd be able to learn a craft like this." There was something in his words, in his eyes, that reminded me of myself when I was young. The same determination, the same burning desire to find his place in life. "Do you like to cook, Aiden?" "More than anything in the world, sir." His eyes lit up. "I've dreamed of being a chef since I was a child." "Well," I smiled, "maybe I can help you with that. I happen to have an opening for a kitchen assistant at the Blue Moon. It's not the most prestigious job, of course, but it's a good start." You're offering me a job?" He looked stunned. "I'm offering you a chance," I corrected. "The rest is up to you." That was the beginning of my unwitting mentorship. Aiden turned out to be not only hardworking, but also incredibly talented. He picked things up quickly, wasn't afraid of hard work, and was full of ideas and enthusiasm. Within a year, he was working as a junior chef, and 2 years later, he became a sous chef. Watching him grow and see his talent blossom was a real joy. At some point, I caught myself feeling almost fatherly toward him. Pride in his successes, a desire to support him in difficult moments, a desire to pass on everything I knew. Perhaps it was a kind of compensatory mechanism. What I couldn't give my son, I gave to this young man. But unlike Kieran, Aiden appreciated it, absorbing every piece of advice, every lesson with gratitude and enthusiasm. We never saw Kieran again. He called occasionally, rarely formally, mostly on holidays. Our conversations were polite but superficial. He didn't mention Bridget, and I didn't ask. It was a silent agreement not to touch on painful topics or reopen old wounds. I heard from mutual acquaintances that things weren't going well for them, that Bridget was unhappy with their financial situation, that she dreamed of more, that she was counting on my inheritance. I didn't gloat. I was sad that my son had made such a choice, tied his life to a woman for whom material values meant more than human relationships. But I didn't interfere. It was his life, his choice, his path. And I had mine. New projects, new people, new horizons. In Silverlight, I met Eleanor Pierce, a widow about my age with a subtle sense of humor and a passion for good food. She often came to dinner alone, sat down at a corner table, and enjoyed her meal with such pleasure that it caught my attention. We started talking, first about the menu, then about wine, then about everything under the sun. It turned out we had a lot in common, a love of life's simple pleasures, an unpretentious nature, and similar views on many things. Our relationship developed slowly, without haste or drama, just two adults who found pleasure in each other's company. I don't know where this path will lead. Maybe it's just friendship, maybe it's something more. But I'm open to new experiences and new possibilities. Life goes on, and there are still many interesting things to come. Sometimes, sitting on the porch of my house in the evening with a glass of wine, I think about the past, about Catherine, about little Kieran, about our dreams and plans. Was there anything I could have done differently? Could I have prevented the estrangement between me and my son? I don't know the answers to these questions, and I probably never will. But I do know one thing. I lived my life by my own rules, staying true to myself and my principles. I created something I can be proud of and protected it from destruction. I found new goals, new joys, new people who appreciate me for who I am, without masks or pretense. And maybe that's what true freedom is. Being yourself no matter what, and finding those who accept you without conditions or expectations. Those for whom what you are is more important than what you have.